Sława everyone, Sława Bogom, and welcome in the 6th episode of the 3rd season of Searching for the Slavic Soul. If you listen to the earlier episodes, you know that in the Season 3 I am summarizing the 2 volumes of Spiritual Culture of the Slavs by Kazimierz Moszyński, and today I will summarize pages 265 to 298, which is roughly half of the chapter 8. The chapter is titled Magia, which means magic. There's some caveats to the content of this episode, but I can't be bothered to repeat it for the 6th time, so I put it in the notes to this episode, so make sure you read it. As to the pages we are summarizing today, I'm just going to get straight into it because there's a lot of material we have to go through. So Moszyński starts with explaining the core features of the Slavic worldview, which we would call the magic point of view, but Slavs generally thought that this is how the world works. So in like a Slavic worldview, there is 6 features that describe the way in which things interact with each other. And these features are, the first is that the range of action of an object is much wider than the object. So, for example, salt will not only blind someone if it's thrown into the eyes of this someone, but will also blind this someone when it's just near this person who is to be blinded. The second feature is that words, thoughts, and actions are much more powerful than they seem to be. For example, just thinking or talking about something can cause immediate manifestation of this something. The third feature is that properties of an object extend to any object that is or can be associated with it. For example, sheep's wool will behave towards wolf's fur exactly the same as sheep behave towards wolves. The fourth feature is that every single property of an object has the same physical properties as, say, like thermal energy, and therefore every single property of an object can be transferred from this object to another object in exactly such the same way as warmth is transferred from, say, fire to like a pan that's standing above the fire. So the example of this feature is that, for example, knowledge contained in a book can be transferred to, say, a newborn if the book is carried around the newborn. Again, just as carrying something warm around a newborn would result in the thermal energy warming up, so being transferred to the newborn. The fifth feature is that the transferring of these properties can be achieved not only via touching or bringing close the object, which properties we want to transfer, but also via walking over the object, throwing the object above, or jumping over the object, or carrying the object around, or walking around the object. And the sixth feature is that in the world there are not only the kind of regular, visible and touchable physical beings, but there is also plenty, and I mean plenty, beings that might not be easy to see or are most of the time invisible, but they nevertheless have every single property of a regular, visible and touchable physical being. A part of these 6 features of Slavic worldview, there is also one fundamental rule of Slavic magic, which is that what you do is not as important as what you think you do. So, for example, if you hit a person thinking that you hit a disease sitting in this person, you are actually hitting the disease, not the person. Also, because the thought is more important than the deed, the exactly same thing done in a Slavic way, the exactly same actions done while doing Slavic magic can have totally different purpose and totally different outcome, entirely dependent on what the person doing the magic thinks he or she is doing. So, for example, rolling an egg on someone's body might result in transfer of the life from the egg to the body of this someone. If this is what the person doing the rolling thinks he or she is doing, or it can result in getting a disease out of the body into the egg that is being rolled, if this is what the person doing the rolling thinks he or she is doing. As far as the practices in Slavic magic, other than the obvious active and passive magic, there is the translational magic, which transfers property. There is transmissive magic, which transmits actions through the space or time at whomever or whatever the magic is aimed. There is sympathetic magic, which acts on the object of magic via either acting on a random object or via either acting on an object related or similar to the intended object. There is creational magic, which creates something but becoming like this something or creating objects similar to this something. And the last type of practice in Slavic magic is inceptive magic, which aims at initiating a future action or state by magically initiating it. From what Moszyński writes, in Slavic magic, thoughts, words, and actions are kind of adding up. So if you just think something when doing magic, it will not be as powerful as thinking it and saying it out loud. And that in turn is not going to be as powerful as thinking it, saying it out loud, and actually doing it or like enacting it while doing magic. Moszyński also briefly mentions para-magical practices, which are practices that are considered magic because of the underlying thinking, but otherwise potentially make sense or would have made sense if they were directed toward not supernatural object. So such practices were mostly discussed 2 episodes ago when we were talking about Slavic medicine, in practices such as sucking out or washing off a disease. But another para-magical practice, which was not mentioned 2 episodes ago, is a practice of dragging, mostly children, but also grown-ups that are very weak, of dragging them through something in order to free the child or the grown-up ill person from whatever ails them. The dragging can be done through a live, freshly split in a half tree. The child can be dragged through a sort of a ring made out of bent branches of a tree or other plant, through spaces between a branch and the trunk of a tree, through spaces between slats in a fence, or even through empty middle of a ring-shaped cake. As far as trees, if they are used to drag the child or a weak grown-up through it. An oak tree is by far the most popular, but in some regions of the Balkans, a bush of dwarf elderberry is preferred. A version of dragging through is driving through a herd of animals, such as pigs or cattle, are driven through a tunnel. Typically, the tunnel is dug into a low slope of a hill, and there are also fire burning at both ends of the tunnel. Often, juniper is put into the fire to increase the effect of the procedure. Moszyński is not sure what is exactly the purpose of the dragging through. It could be to make a magical contact with the healthy tree, and in order to pass the health from the tree to the dragged person. It could be passing the strength of the tree into the person, but it could also be an attempt to remove the disease or whatever is ailing the person or animal by dragging him, her, or it through the whole ring or a tunnel. Moszyński cites the words said out loud during such rituals, and the words are translated by me into English. They are: holy tree, green oak, take away his tears, cast them off him, grant him health. These kind of words, they kind of imply that the purpose is rather the former, not the latter. But Moszyński also gives example of apparently quite popular custom of Slavic beekeepers, where they seek to acquire a larynx of a wolf, and if they get it, they put it on the exit from the beehive in such way that bees have to fly through it when flying in and out of the beehive, and that is believed to transfer the wolf properties of the wolf's larynx on the bees, and that's supposed to make the bees stronger, and it will kind of allow the bees to attack other beehives and steal the abundance from the other beehives and bring the abundance back to the own beehive. So Moszyński hypothesizes that through dragging or driving through, that the purpose of it is transfer of properties other than health, that, you know, the transfer of properties of other than health might also be happening in such way. Another paramagical practice is making noises to scare off all sorts of supernatural beings. The noise can be made by screaming, shooting guns, clanging on metal objects, honking, ringing of bells, tapping and clattering of rattles, whip cracking, or even making animal noises or disturbing animals so they can make noises. The making of all these noises is done to chase away witches and demons, including demons pushing or driving hail clouds into a village. And here Moszyński describes a custom which was recorded in Serbia in 1908 on the night of from 21st to 22nd of July in the village of Veliki Izor near Crna River. And this custom is so cool that I'm going to briefly summarize it too, even though it's not strictly speaking magic. So as you might or might not know, in Serbia, and as far as I know, generally among southern Slavs, there is a belief that żmije, so Slavic dragons, they fight with demons that bring storms. So żmije are seen as beneficial, but sometimes it could happen that żmij took liking to, so the Slavic dragon took liking to a particular place, like a village, and got asleep in this place. And żmij sleeping in a particular place scares off all the rain from this place, because the demons that bring the clouds are scared of Żmii and they stay away. So if there was a drought in a village, it kind of meant that there is a Żmii that is asleep there. So the Żmii had to be chased away. Such chasing away happened on the night of 21st to 22nd of July in 1908 in the village of Veliki Izor, and it was recorded. So at the end of the day, all the women, children and elders, they hid in their houses. All the animals were safely locked away. And after sunset, all the men from the village gathered in the cemetery outside of the village and started a bonfire there. Then they undressed and started dancing around the fire, and they dance a dance that's called Wzino Koło, and they dance in complete silence until they collapsed from exhaustion. And after that, they got up on their feet and they ran to the village screaming and shouting and making terrible noise by beating on like metal vessels and clanging with roasting spits and various other metal tools. They ran through the whole village, through every single like nook and cranny, to chase the Żmii out and kind of to direct him to the fire that was burning on the cemetery, where they trapped the Żmii with another dance of Wzino Koło until the Żmii left the village through the fire. And now let me comment on it some more. So this whole thing happened at the end of July. So that was peak harvest. These men labored in the fields every day, like 7 days a week, from sunrise to sunset for weeks. And on top of that, after a whole day of work, after sunset, they danced naked until exhaustion twice. And on top of that, they ran through the whole village naked with only some pots and roasting spits in their hands to chase away a dragon. And this is peak masculinity, people. This is what Slavic men have been doing since the first Slav was born. They have been working together, using their strength, using their bodies, everything they have and more to protect women, children and elders from every imaginable and unimaginable harm, including protecting them from Slavic dragons. And they've been doing it for the whole village, for people they liked and disliked, for people they respected and disrespected, even for families of some other men who they might not even liked. They did not do it to preserve their own bloodline or their wealth, but to protect everyone. And this is what Slavic men do. This is what Slavic men are. They are strong, resilient, committed, determined, and so bloody brave that they stand up naked to a dragon and the dragon runs away. And that was obviously my comment. And now back to Moszyński. Making noise is not the only way of chasing away supernatural beings. Beating is also widely used, as it was discussed in the episode on Slavic healing, where beating the patient in order to beat the disease that sits inside the patient is one of the most common way of healing. But beating can be also used to chase away supernatural beings that have not caused a disease yet, or supernatural beings that can cause bad luck or such. While discussing this topic, Moszyński makes a very important observation, namely that a wand that in itself has magical properties is not an original part of Slavic tradition. Magic wands that are used to touch objects in order to transfer magical properties onto the object, they are of Germanic origins. The original Slavic concept is either a staff or a stick used to beat or scare or chase away supernatural beings, or a twig or a bunch of twigs of a particular plant that's used to either sweep away the supernatural beings or is used to stroke, say, an animal to transfer particular properties of this particular plant. So, bunch of willow twigs or stinging nettles, so essentially brooms, are used to sweep around the house to chase away malevolent demons. Or a willow tree with catkins, and that's important because it's not about the willow, but it's about the catkins. So it's used to stroke an animal to transfer to the animal the roundness and the softness and the fullness properties of the catkins. So, and this is my comment, not Moszyński, if you ever hear, read or watch any content about magic wands used in Slavic magic, and there's a lot of content like that out there, you can be certain it's 100% Germanic influence and not a part of authentic original Slavic magic. Magic wands used to cast spells or to direct magic are just not a part of the original Slavic tradition. The last form of para-magical practices are attempts to cheat or mislead the supernatural beings in order to protect, typically a child, but sometimes a grown-up or an animal. The most common example of such practices are calling children ugly names to convince malevolent supernatural beings that the child is not worth their attention. A less known example is pretending to sell a child, typically to a relative or a neighbor, so the child is perceived as not belonging to his or her parents or to the household. Another example from Bulgaria, Serbia, Montenegro and Herzegovina is announcing a birth of a son by cracking a whip, which is done to scare away malevolent demons, and saying out loud that they don't say that the mother gave birth to a son, but they say out loud that the she-wolf has given birth to a wolf. And such practice was supposed to protect both the mother and the son. As to practices that Moszyński considers actual magic, he starts with scattering, typically seeds, which is done for many purposes, one of which is to transfer the life from the seeds to the object of the magical ritual. So seeds are scattered or thrown at newlyweds or at a new house, but they are also thrown at the dead to neutralize the death in the dead with the life contained in the seeds. Scattering seeds, particularly poppy seeds, is used in protection magic against malevolent spirits of the dead, because it is believed that the dead will have to pick up all the seeds on their way before moving forward. This practice stems from Slavic belief that the dead are kind of like birds, so they related to birds. So from this, it follows that if you scatter seeds, the dead as birds, they like acting as birds, they will stop to pick up all the seeds. However, and it is my comment, not Moszyński, partially because the concept of OCD was completely unknown in the times of Moszyński, but from a perspective of 21st century, when you read about Slavic protective magic, there is kind of a distinctive OCD feel to it. I will be talking about it more later in this and the next episode, but here I just want to signal the OCD tropes I'm seeing, and you can make your own mind if you are seeing it too. And now back to Moszyński. So let's move now to proper magic, and starting with the first type that Moszyński discusses, which is the translational magic, which hopefully you remember. It's used to transfer in a magical, not as Moszyński calls it, a rational way. So it's used to transfer in a magical way properties from one object or living thing to another. The techniques used in such type of magic are totally pan-Slavic, and they are very important element of Slavic magic used all over the Slavdom. These techniques involve stepping over, jumping over, or throwing something over, as well as walking under an object. I call them techniques, but they are kind of perceived by Slavs more like the regular ways in which properties are transferred, and then the knowledge of such ways in which properties are transferred is used in Slavic magic. So say that you walk over a dead body. In Slavic way of perceiving the ways of the world, doing such thing will automatically, whether you want it or not, or whether you think about it or not, it will automatically transfer your life to the dead body and the death or the disease of the dead body to you. Hence, stepping over a dead body is a huge taboo in Slavic tradition, because no one wants to give life back to the dead. And obviously no one wants to acquire death or a disease. So because properties transfer when your way crosses over with the way of something else, be it by stepping over this something else, or jumping over it, or walking under it, or throwing it over you, Slavs are super mindful of where they step and over what. For example, if a bride steps over a broom instead of walking around it, it is believed that her husband will for sure treat her disrespectfully. Well, now I see it does not make much sense in English, but in Polish it makes total sense, because a broom in Polish is miotła, and to treat someone disrespectfully is pomiatać, and both words miotła and pomiatać come from Proto-Slavic mesti, which means to throw or to toss, to sweep up, or to clear away. So, according to the rules of Slavic magic, the broom and being disrespectful is the same because it comes from the same word. Slavs are also very careful not to step over or otherwise cross their way with all sorts of lines for whatever reason present on the ground, because it is a sure way to get skin breakouts, for example. It might not be as bad as step on a crack, break your mother's back, but the principle is the same, isn't it? And based on this principle, there's a lot of prohibition put on, for example, pregnant women who are not allowed to step over animals, not to transfer the properties of the animal into the child, or they're not allowed to step over any sorts of cut lines, for example, like a cut on a threshold left by an axe, so the child does not get a hair lip. Is it only me, or there are OCD tropes here, aren't they? Am I making it up? The rule of transferring of properties by stepping over it is used on purpose in Slavic magic to transfer properties for own benefit. So, an obvious example is jumping over a bonfire during kupała to transfer the abundance and strength of fire into you. Another example is a procedure that's done if you want to transfer property of abundant milk production from the cows of your neighbor to your own cows. If you want to do that, you put bread crust on the way of the herd of your neighbor, and after the neighbor's cows step over it, you pick the bread crust and you give it to your cows to eat. Or if, say, a sheep does not want to nurse own lamb, which Slavs say that the sheep does not like the lamb, the sure way of making the sheep like the lamb again is to get two brothers to kiss each other under the sheep, which in a way forces the sheep to step over the brothers, that obviously the brothers like each other, and in this way the property of liking own kin is transferred from the brothers to the sheep. Similarly, properties can be transferred by going through something or walking in circles around something. Of course, walking with the sun, which, as I explained in the first episode of the 3rd season, is walking around something clockwise. For example, if a woman does not want to have any more children, all she has to do is walk 3 times around a barren tree, and in this way the property of being barren will transfer from the tree to the woman. The next type of Slavic magic is transmissive magic, which transmits magic through space and time. That's commonly done via wind or water. For example, spells are cast into the wind or water, and the elements are obliged to deliver the spell to the intended target. Although sometimes the spell will miss the intended target, and such stray spell can hit a random person, animal, or household and do harm there. And because I forgot to mention that in Slavic tradition, spell casting, known as czary, and this word comes from Proto-Slavic czar, which means magic or sorcery. So in Slavic tradition, spell casting is using magic to do harm, either maliciously, just to hurt someone just because, or egoistically to get the benefits for oneself, which obviously, and that's my comment, not Moszyński, debunks all the folklore BS stories about white and black Slavic witches or white and black Slavic magic, because Slavic spellcasting is by definition exclusively malevolent. The benevolent Slavic magic does not involve spellcasting, but either zamawianie, so talking to the malevolent being to convince it to go somewhere else, or chasing, beating, or scaring the malevolent being away. As to transmissive magic, which could transmit czary, so magic spells, which, let me remind you once more, in Slavic tradition are always malevolent. So transmitting magic used to transmit czary through space. And a part of using water or wind, czary could also be transmitted via horns, like oxen horns, with a hole on the tip. And to do that, the spellcaster, so czarownik or czarownica, they would fill such horn with sand, gravel or broken glass, and then they use the horn to blow it all together with the cast spell toward the target of czary. And such type of czary caused something that was called strieły, so pneumonia. And Moszyński cites the spells used in such magic, but I will not be saying them out loud because being a Rodnover, I firmly believe in the power of Slavic Słowo, so in the power of Slavic word. But in English, such spell would translate as something along the lines of go to the one on which I'm casting the spell, shoot him in the heart, dry him, burn him, send him to his grave. The transmissive magic can also work in time and also if the location of the target is not known. This rule Moszyński illustrated describing a Belarusian protective ritual for cattle, which includes casting spells on wolves. This ritual is done when the cattle is first driven to the pastures and is supposed to protect the herd through the whole grazing season. So the cattle is gathered on one pasture and it's circled around 3 times by the shepherds. Then the oldest shepherd says a prayer asking God to grant the cattle safety from harm, including harm from predators. And after that, all the shepherds turn around back to the cattle and face to the field, and they start screaming like they are chasing away wolves. And one shepherd cracks a whip, and the oldest shepherd shouts, "Sol żnu w oczy," which means, "I throw salt in your eyes." While at the same time another shepherd actually throws salt into the fields. Then the oldest shepherd shouts "Chływnia żnu w żubu," which means "I throw a torch in your teeth," while at the same time another shepherd actually throws a torch into the field. So you see in this ritual, which by the way was performed by Christians who attended church on Sunday and everything, that all the rules of Slavic magic are applied in this ritual to strengthen it. So there are the thoughts, there are the actions, and there are the words, and they are used together in the same goal. Next type of magic is sympathetic magic, which Moszyński, forever a critical thinker and a skeptic, calls proper magic because it makes no sense. This type of magic, let me remind you, is used to act on the object either by acting on a random object or by acting on an object related or similar to the intended object. This type of magic beautifully illustrates the fundamental rule of Slavic magic, which says that what you do is not as important as what you think you do. In this type of magic, we have very common practices as reversing something to reverse evil. Evil as in evil eye. So if you think you've been affected by an evil eye, all you have to do is to reverse something, like turn a pot upside down or turn a picture back to front while thinking about reversing the evil eye, and that is enough to reverse the evil eye. All sorts of malevolent beings or influences can also be thrown away. Here Moszyński gives an example of what people do if they have to refuse a pregnant woman. If you don't know, in Slavic tradition, refusing anything to a pregnant woman is taboo, which if you break it, it will bring all sorts of malevolent effects on you. So, if you have to refuse a pregnant woman, when she walks away from you, you need to throw something after her. It does not matter what it is. It can be a piece of coal or some dirt, but you have to throw it after her to throw away the evil. Another example of such magic is breaking things to break whatever malevolent influence is ongoing. This is why, for example, pots were broken when a dead body was carried out of the house. Another one is magical closing of, say, wolf's jaw by closing a padlock during the opening of grazing season. By the way, a different way of closing wolf's jaws is by getting an axe or a knife stuck in something, which is a way of ensuring that wolf's jaw will get stuck too. This is why if a sheep got lost so late in the day that there was no time to find it before sunset, the shepherd will drive an axe into a tree, and it will not take the axe out until the morning to ensure that the wolf's jaws will be stuck as long as the axe is stuck, so the sheep will be safe. Yet another way is to sew something together, which was done by women in Bulgaria. A woman would grab the corner of her, say, apron and start sewing it together. That had to be done in the presence of another person who had to ask, "What are you sewing?" The woman would reply, "I am sewing the wolf's ears so they can't hear the sheep, the goat or the cattle or whatever." Then the pattern of question and answer would have to repeat another 2 times, and the second time the woman would reply that she's sewing the eyes of the wolves, and then that she's sewing the jaws of the wolf. Similar to sewing is tying a knot, which is a huge element of Slavic magic, used in both protective magic and in spell casting, which, let me remind you, in Slavic magic is always malevolent. So, you could tie a knot on someone's wheat to cause all sorts of bad things to happen to the owner of the field. But you could also tie a knot by your, say, belt to protect you from such spell, because you're tying the spell before it's cast. And because a knot tied for protection was used in protective magic, a fishing net, an item made entirely out of knots, sometimes used as a sort of barrier against spells, and used, for example, to cover brides. By this logic, untying or opening is used in Slavic magic to either undo a spell or to facilitate opening or passing in childbirth, for example. Among Eastern Slavs, it's customary to open everything. Cabinets, chest, untie everything, including combing through the pregnant woman's hair to facilitate easy childbirth. And if childbirth is particularly bad, like particularly difficult, it's not unusual for the peasant to ask the priest to open the door behind the altar in the church, which is a sure way of granting the passage of the child into the world. In sympathetic magic, relations of the objects and the actions is absolutely everything. Also, objects that are part of larger entities are believed to have the same properties as the larger entities. So, in Slavic magic, hawk's feather is the same as hawk, and a chicken feather is the same as chicken. Hence, there is widely spread belief that if in one duvet chicken and hawk's feathers are put together, the chicken feathers will run away from hawk's feathers, and the duvet will therefore forever be losing the feathers. Similarly, your hair is the same as you. So if a bird gets hold of your hair and makes a nest out of it, you will have headache for the whole time the nest is in use. So, as you can guess, Slavs were very careful about not losing hair in places where birds or malevolent beings, including your neighbors, could get hold of your hair, because that could result in your harm. The positive side of this aspect of Slavic magic is that if you get robbed and manage to get hold of a piece of clothing of the robber, you could proceed to torture the piece of clothing, and that would cause harm to the robber. Moszyński gives several examples of such events, including one report where the thief who stole honey actually got ill and died after his coat, which he left at the crime scene, was severely flogged. And I'm going to stop here on the page 298, where I will pick up next time to finish discussing the creational and the inceptive magic, to talk more about spell casting, and if there's time, maybe about practicing trance, as in inducing trance via dancing and singing. But before I end, as it's became customary, I'd like to make some more comments to make sure that I highlight the bits that are, in my opinion, most relevant to modern practice of Slavic native faith. The most important thing, in my opinion, other than the fact that Slavic men are awesome, is the power of thoughts, words, and actions working in unison. They literally, if you put the three together to the same goal, they are the core of Slavic magic. And I think that modern Rodnovers should be mindful of that when living their lives, and particularly when striving to achieve a goal. So, following the lessons of Slavic magic, make sure that what you say you want is what you think you want, and what you do to achieve it is in sync with your words and with your thoughts. If you, for example, say that you want to have a family, but do not do anything in order to build one or keep the one that you have, and at the same time think badly or with resentment about a member of or about all members of your family, do not expect your family to last. It simply can't, because your goals are torn apart by your thoughts, words, and actions, pulling in different directions. Same applies to your religious practice. If you engage in, say, Dziady celebration, be it at home or at the grave of one of your ancestors, but you don't actually think that the ancestors are there with you, don't expect the celebration to have particularly powerful spiritual or any effect, really. You want the effect to be for your ancestors to get involved in your life, to get the supernatural wheels going on your behalf. But you can't expect them to be bothered to do it if it's all make-believe for you, can you? Would you want to help someone who does not even believe that you exist? If you don't believe that someone exists, this someone, if he or she exists, is by definition a stranger. So don't let your ancestors be strangers to you. Believe that they are there for you, and then let the magic happen. And that is it for today. Next time, in the moon of Heder, we will talk about some more Slavic magic. And until then, take care of yourself, respect your men, and get your thoughts, words, and actions in sync. Sława.